What's up, guys, and welcome back to Paint Bravely, the podcast where you can find a little bit of encouragement, discover ways to make your hobby more fun, and most importantly, learn to paint bravely. Now, this week we're going to go a little bit different. We're going to start off with a few things that we've done in the last couple of weeks, whether we can think of something or not, and how depressing that actually is. And then we're going to go over a few different questions from, our YouTube account, and kind of we don't answer as often as we probably should. So we want to kind of roll into that.
Well, that's what the podcast is for.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We get to talk.
Yeah.
I'm not a typist. I'm not good at that. So we're just going to talk.
Nah, that's what the podcast is for.
Anyways, so what have you been up to in the last few weeks, Brent? Have you come up with anything better than black poster board?
I still maintain that was a good 2-week achievement, figuring out I needed a black background for my filming. I thought that was pretty big. But again, today we were about to record, had to think, what have I done in the last few weeks? What have I painted? What have I, what innovations have I made? And this was one of the weeks where I was coming up against that big wall of, oh man, what have I done in the last 2 weeks? And the answer is I've been researching paint pigments.
Pigments?
So... yeah, the pigments, the colored powders that get mixed into paint medium to make paint.
Okay, yeah.
And, so nominally this is for a YouTube video, hobby science, what are paint pigments and how are they colored and how do paints work and paint smarter, and still working on a title for it, but that's the basic idea here. And so most of the Vallejo paint and Army Painter and GW paints don't tell you what colored pigments are in them, whereas art supply stores or like nice artist paints, you look at the side of the tube and it says right on there, titanium white, PW6. It tells you exactly what the color of the paint is. It's not skull white or brain matter beige or anything like that. It's... yeah. You are painting with titanium white. It's titanium oxide, and it's white pigment number 6. And, you can go and look that up and figure out exactly what that is, what its properties are, all the historical uses of this pigment, and find out everything you want to know. And for me, that's the sort of thing that gets me really interested, and it absolutely is a massive hole that you can just walk right into.
Yeah.
So, having a YouTube channel, I like to think that it would be nice to post a video every week like you do, Casey, but sometimes I just get super distracted and sidetracked. So, yeah, what I've been doing for the past couple of weeks is I've been looking at all my bottles of paint and writing down pigment numbers and looking them up and drawing out their structures. I was able to hack a copy of ChemDraw, which is kind of like hacking a copy of Adobe Suite or hacking a copy of Microsoft Office, getting yourself some software that costs a stupid amount of money.
Right.
But for me, that was ChemDraw, and that's the ability to draw little hexagons and bonds and electrons and stuff. So
that costs as much as an Adobe Suite.
I mean, it is very simple software, but it costs, it's one of those specialty softwares that costs a lot. And Adobe Suite is a nice suite. I get that. ChemDraw is not a particularly fancy program. It just allows you to make pretty nice drawings of chemical bonds and structures, and gets the angles right and stuff.
For chemists.
Right. And it's one of those things that they give it a new number every year. Every year it gets a new edition or whatever, and it's exactly the same, which is good because I know how to use the old version, but. And luckily, I was able to, use a code from 5 years ago when I had legit access, and it just booted right up. Yes.
Nice. They haven't even changed their old codes. They're just it's fine.
Yeah, I don't know how many people they actually need to employ to keep this going, but it can't be a lot.
It's one guy in a basement.
Yeah, they're not updating it too regular. Yeah, it's one guy in a basement. Absolutely.
He's this is worth it. I spent a lot of time on this program.
I'm sure they're still raking in the money, but
Probably.
Yeah, if you're out there, guy in the basement updating ChemDraw software, it was me. I'm sorry. You have a great program. And listeners, if you're interested in chemistry, go out there and buy ChemDraw and don't do what I did. Anyway, I've been spending my time drawing up pigment molecules and trying to figure out, what is actually in our paints. So the supply that I have is the inks, the Liquitex and Dollar Rowney inks. Those are supplies that I actually use to paint my models. Mostly I'm using Vallejo or GW or Army Painter, but the inks that I love to put through the airbrush, those actually tell you that this is, PB15 phthalo blue, blue 15 pigment. And you can go and look that up and see the structure and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so I went through my entire stack of those, wrote down all the pigments, and just trying to get an idea of, how many different pigments are actually in a line of paints, how many of them are used in like half of the different colors, how many of them show up only once. And it was actually really interesting. And like I said, I just got distracted and went down this rabbit hole, and it'll be a video eventually. But there's a few little interesting tidbits in there. Like orange was the only secondary color where they used the two primaries, yellow and red, to get orange.
Oh, really?
Everything else was the orange natural ink. Yeah. So flame orange was a yellow and a red, but the purple was a purple or a violet pigment. The greens were a green pigment. Turquoise, they actually used, it was a blue and a yellow, where you might think it would be a blue and a green to make turquoise, right, but it was a blue and a yellow, which also makes sense. But kind of just going through, and I'm sure anyone coming from like an artist background has a knowledge of how to mix up paints from pigments, and so they already know some of the key ones. But for us who come at it not necessarily as an artist or not necessarily as a chemist, but as like a gamer, somebody who is painting Space Marines, it's kind of interesting to trace this back to actual art supplies and understand. I mean, there's both science here, but there's also technology and history and all that stuff. So,
well, that should be pretty interesting. I'm curious, did you do any testing between, like, say, the Liquitex Titanium White and the Daler Rowney White, which I don't think is actually called Titanium White, but it's supposed to be?
They both use the same white pigment. So, like, some of the things I figured out is anytime there's any white in any of these, it's titanium white. It's PW6 for all of these.
That, like,
anytime there's black in any of these, it's PBK7, black 7, carbon black, soot. So there's some that show up all the time. Like, it's always that black, it's always that white. Phthalo blue, which is one of Bob Ross's blues. He'd go through, he'd have his phthalo blue. Yeah, and so you get to remember some of those names. And I can't remember sap green. I think that might be a pure pigment, but I think it also might be a combination of two other pigments. He had his palette, and we all eventually got to know all those names.
Alizarin crimson. That's a good one. It's just good to say.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's derived from a chemical name, and I'm sure that sounds like a pure pigment to me. That has a PR for red pigment number. I don't know what it is, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, I've worked with a lot of different art materials and seen, all these names, and especially watching a lot of Bob Ross and growing up. My mom was an art major. Like, she eventually switched to teaching, but she minored in art and did tons of painting. We've got pretty cool looking canvases at my parents' house, and so it's something I've always been around, but I don't know much about. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, that sounds cool. Ask your mom about this stuff. That sounds like a resource right there. Like,
That's a good point. I could have just asked her.
yeah, you don't have to ask me. Like, just go home, talk to your parents.
She's not going to make
that's another way
cool
to do it.
YouTube video about it and tell me.
Tell her Happy Mother's Day while you're at it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So yeah, I'm trying to think. What else? Oh, I guess the only other thing to mention that I don't know if I'll put in the video or not, but like my cats both got some phthalo green on them. They, I had these little piles of brightly colored powder, and taking pictures of them stuff, and then I like turned around to get a spoon or something to start moving the pigment around, and then like all of a sudden the cat's face is blue. Like, oh.
That's amazing. Tell me you got pictures of that, right?
No, I didn't. Like,
oh, Brent.
No, I didn't. I like almost didn't want to have a record of it, but here we are recording it for podcast forever. But
right,
yeah,
it's somewhere.
The safety concerns are not great. It was a very small quantity, but it is a high staining pigment, and so just a tiny little bit gets a lot of green, and so you fans of phthalo green will know that. Yeah. Awesome. And Gordon got just a little bit on his left front paw and his left right paw. Nice. He's got those white mittens or boots or whatever. That shows up real strong. Oh yeah.
That's great.
But yeah, earlier today I was getting ready to record the podcast, and I finally put away all my little piles of colored pigments and stuff back in their baggies and sealed it up, and tried to get the color off of the wood table and everything. Mm-hmm. And I mostly got it. Mostly got it.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's an art studio. It's supposed to have pigment and paint on everything. If you don't have paint on your walls and ceiling, you're doing it wrong. You're not hitting that brush hard enough against that little bar.
Beat the devil out of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. You've been going on any side trips for like I said, for me, this was probably should have been painting, I don't know, a model or something. That's my hobby. I paint models.
Right.
Instead I was first. Like, chemist first. I was cracking into stupid chemistry software for drawing molecules, and I was on Wikipedia a lot, and I don't know, time flies.
Yeah, when you're having so much fun. I tend to go down rabbit holes like that where, I'm working on a project and I get to a certain point and I say, okay, I need to go pick something else up. And then I pass by another project and I say, I need to get some more stuff for this one. And then I just kind of swap between them. Nothing is probably applicable to, making a video, but, whatever it is in front of me, I don't know. I hop between projects a lot and then get distracted and end up rushing to finish something, the first thing that I started, whatever that is. So I feel you on that. Just jumping down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it happens when I discover a new material or something.
Yeah.
Or actually for me, for 3D printing, sometimes I'll just have a week where pretty much all I'm doing is making sure that my prints are working and getting printers set up and washing prints off and curing them, and find that I have no time to be painting or anything. It's just like, wow, another week's gone by, and I've printed out this nice pile of minis, but where did the time go? Exactly. Like all my hobby time was spent babysitting printers. Yeah,
that's pretty funny. Yeah, the world we live in now. You don't just go and get the models, or some people just do, but otherwise you're printing out your own models, and that takes time all on its own.
No, I have thoroughly enjoyed the time I've spent printing models, except for it kind of makes your hands sticky and stuff.
Right.
So resin, I keep definitely keep the cats away from the resin. Like I'd rather have them a little bit of non-toxic green than
for sure,
not too toxic but very sticky and smelly resin.
Yeah. Well, and cats get on everything. You'd be feeling like little sticky spots on. You'd touch something and your hand would stick to it, just be for years.
Yeah. Well, now, of course, my brain's going through all the problems I'd have if I had cats in the same room as printers, and the way they jump on tables and like shake things around, like just the vibration of like a cat landing on a table, I'm sure would just ruin a print. Like you'd at least get like a massive layer line, like right when they did that.
It'd get right to the eyes.
Something would be out of alignment. Yeah, there'd just be a shift halfway through the model. Like,
gotta redo that. Great. It's not like you can just melt it down and start over.
No, you can't. Yeah, I've got one that's bad enough. He loves to rub against the tripod when I'm filming something, or especially when I'm going to take like glamour shots. I've got my black background all set up. I've got my tripod. I'm about to hit the button on the shutter, and the cat's just rubbing against one of the 3 tripod legs. Like what are you doing kneeling down here by the camera? He wants to hang out.
Yeah.
They'll find a way to ruin anything.
That seems like cats in general. Like, they don't necessarily mean to, but they will ruin everything in the most loving way possible.
That's fair. Yeah. So what else here? What have you been up to? Enough cats and pigments. What have you been up to?
Let's see here. Well, I made a fun video last week, and I suppose we'll get to that. I just bought a new dirt bike, so that was pretty great. Pretty excited about that. The injuries to come, you know.
What was wrong with your old dirt bike?
Well, actually, so I have dirt bikes out of my parents' house. But I really don't feel like driving an hour to go ride for an hour to then drive back an hour. And I've been wanting one at my house for a while, because there's some, it's all different places to ride and stuff. So, I finally broke down and found one and bought one, and I'm hoping to get some pretty good use out of that this summer. But we'll see if there's time, because that's really the thing. Doing all of the painting and the videos and the everything. Time is harder and harder to come by these days.
Sure. So are you saving an update on your new studio for later? You saving that for next episode? You're gonna don't want to squander that right now.
Yeah, I don't want to throw it all away just yet. I want to kind of milk that for as much as I can, because it was a lot of work to build and get done. And of course I'm gonna have a video just showing everything and all the work that went into it, which is pretty fun. Yeah. I've got a lot of video for it, so I'm pretty excited to get that out there. Nice. Yeah, I was also on a podcast week and a half ago. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of it. You might not have heard of it. It's a thing. It's called Life After the Cover Save.
I've heard of it. There's a lot of people who haven't heard of Life After the Cover Save, but I've heard of it.
Okay.
I've been on it too. So you've been on it?
Yeah, I was just on it like last week.
I've been on it like 2, or depending on how you count, like 4 times or more. I don't know.
Well, that's kind of weird, because we did talk about you a lot. Like a lot.
Yeah.
They didn't even ask me questions.
Yeah, so if you want to hear Casey talking to a couple of strangers about me, go to Life After the Cover Save and check out some of their recent episodes. Yeah,
I think you'll find it to be a stimulating and interesting conversation, mostly about Brent.
Yeah, so they were originally, I guess, a Warhammer 40K podcast, and they've been at it for 10 years. And this is actually a kind of an evolution, because I don't even know what they're about now, and I'm not really sure when they stopped being about Warhammer 40K. But
as far as I know,
they now brand themselves as
a 40K. But I haven't been listening for 10 years.
I'm not sure. So we're on episode 6. You and I, Casey, are recording episode 6. We're in like year 0, year
Pretty
1.
Much,
I don't know.
Yeah.
So where are we going to be in 10 years? That is a frightening thought, but everybody starts somewhere, and then
I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to think about that. Let's put in a list what we did every 2 weeks over the last 10 years and then rate how depressing that was.
I'm actually looking forward to that. I think that's going to be really interesting. Yeah, take what we say was the most important thing about the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We each have 26 of them in a year, and we read them off real fast, so we get a year in the space of like 5 minutes.
I am looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be a positive experience or kind of depressing, but we're going to find out.
I'm erring on the side of depressing. Yeah. Just to be safe.
Yeah. So right, set your expectations low and then be pleasantly surprised. That's the way to do it. So over the past 2 weeks, I've gotten black poster board and pigment powders, and I actually ruined several pieces of black poster board with pigment powders. So I'm kind of moving in the right direction here, but kind of a step backwards too. So
right,
it's all right.
Are they at least double-sided? You can flip them.
Yeah, it's not the situation where like one side is way glossier than the other side or something like that. So you can flip them, but then like your wood desk gets colors.
Right, yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all right. We're all locked into our little quarantines here. This is, I don't know when you're listening to this, but this is when we're recording it. And I had to order black poster board. It wasn't a situation where I was going to go out to the store to buy a piece of black poster board. So if you're ordering poster board, get the 25 pack. So we're good. Don't worry, fans. Brent has black poster board for days. He's got pigment powder for days.
Good job.
And Casey's doing well over there too. He's had a couple of good weeks himself. He was on a joke podcast, if you will, Life After the Cover Save, and now we got to mention on another podcast too.
We did, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, Trapped Under Plastic. Yeah,
I like that podcast.
So I do too. Yeah, Scott and John are better painters than us. They have more YouTube viewers and subscribers than we do, and they're more organized in their podcast, but they come out every other Monday. So if you want a podcast every other Monday, that's not this Monday. I was about to say Life After the Cover Save. I don't know when they come out. Trapped Under Plastic. All right.
That would have been good though. We just leave it at that.
Yeah. But thanks guys for the mentions. Thanks for letting Casey and I onto Life After the Cover Save. That's always fun. And let's move it along here, Casey. What else? What else has been going on in the last few weeks?
Well, I mean, I guess I bring up that video that I made last week. So I had a really interesting time. Normally when I make a video, it's pretty straightforward. I get the model, I paint the model, and then I show the model. But last week was a little bit different, and it brings up a few other questions, but essentially, I started painting and I could have stopped, but then I decided to keep going, and then I felt like I ruined it, and I got pretty frustrated, and then I did it again, and then I did it again. And that's not something I normally do. I feel like I'm pretty good at knowing when to stop, but in this case, I just really overdid it and eventually ended up making a video about that specifically and not even about the model, which is also kind of a new thing for me and for what I usually do. I just thought that was a really interesting experience, and I know a lot of people have that problem where they start thinking about it too much, or something ends up happening, or you make a mistake, or you didn't plan for something and you end up at least according to you, ruining the model that you started painting. Has that ever happened to you before, where you just went off the rails? Sometimes,
yes. I've gotten better and better about not completely ruining a model or not letting it get to me, but yes, faces especially, I'd say.
Yeah.
Faces are one of those areas where it's harder to repaint because the detail is so fine, like the the eye socket and being able to see like the shape of the eyelid and the corner of the eye and everything. Once you get about 2-3 coats of paint on there, you're starting to lose that detail.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we're talking about painting models, you doing your eBay rescues, half the time you strip it down and half the time you just like layer another coat on.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, it's paint. You add another layer of paint, it's fine. You can repaint it as many times as you want.
Yeah.
But so I guess there's really 2 issues there. One, if you repaint it enough times, the paint and the frustration builds up into something that's not necessarily pretty. Like, for me, it's faces, and I glom up the face, and then the wash doesn't do anywhere near as well the 3rd time that you paint the face as it did the first time you paint the face, and then it gets frustrating. But
yeah, and I mean, I ended with saying it is just paint. It's not like you can't take it off. Like, we do it all the time. We strip paint off and then repaint it. In this case, I'm probably going to let it sit and just be a healthy reminder for a little while to slow down, just take it easy a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, speaking from the point of making YouTube videos, a video about frustration and, arriving at a model that you're happy with and that sort of thing is actually way more transferable and relatable than is I painted this ghost.
Right.
And
yeah.
At a few very small moments in time while you were painting that ghost, you had a pretty good ghost on your hands,
right?
Which is nice. But the real lesson was thinking about what happens when you're painting along bravely and things do not work out the way you want, and when do you draw a line and just declare victory regardless? When do you throw it back in the stripper? When do you try to repaint it again? When do you just move on to a different project? That's a deep topic, and it's something we absolutely could spend the rest of the episode on. I don't know if we will or not, but
yeah. I did want to. That might be something to think about. Is I've been thinking about this idea that there might be times when painting bravely gets to the point where maybe you're painting a little too bravely. You're going outside the box here, painting outside the lines. And I don't think it happens very often, but I think there is a threshold there. And, we might need to explore that at some point.
So I only watched this video of yours once, but were you painting bravely or were you painting, and forgive me here, badly?
It was badly. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
It was stupidly is probably a better way to put it. It's just the lack of
painting
planning
stupidly,
and
yes.
Forcing it rather than just enjoying the process. So, I don't mean to say that like I was painting too bravely for this model specifically, but that idea had crossed my mind as like a topic of conversation.
Yeah. So just for the listeners at home, this was a ghost. And what in particular did you think you messed up, or what in particular was really causing you the stress here?
Some of it was the color combination. But actually I got a really, really enlightening comment today, in fact. A little bit before we started recording this. And it was specifically that none of the things that I actually painted were done poorly, but that the overall model isn't cohesive together. So like the axe on its own looks good. The like cloak on the ghost, which is kind of this, like a shawl that goes over the top of him that's supposed to be like corporeal, right? It's like in this realm. Looks fine. The ghosts and the transitions look fine, but you put everything together, and because of a lack of planning, it just doesn't come together as a single piece. So, and I mean, that's
Okay.
kind of what it feels like when I look at it, when I hold it and I say, okay, I'm going to critique this model, as if it was someone else's. And that's kind of the way that I see it. It's like, this isn't the worst thing. It's just none of it goes together, so a lack of planning and just, going forward and just trying it, didn't work out. So Yeah, definitely planning. Planning is big.
Well, I mean, the steps that you were taking to try to fix it made sense. Like you were changing the color of one item at a time, pretty much, weren't you?
Yeah.
Like you went back and you changed the axe color, and I forget the rest of the video, but you.
Yeah, it was just fixing small mistakes, trying to get the colors to be more cohesive. But even then, the
Mhm.
textures of the final product are different for each piece. Like the airbrush transitions are really smooth, but then the cloak is really grungy and weird, and that doesn't necessarily
Yeah,
mesh together.
yeah,
Yeah. But that does bring up
yeah. I gotcha.
a few different comments that we've gotten lately. I don't know if you
Sure.
want to go through some of these. You want to talk about some of these, and yeah, we'll just go
Yeah,
down
I've
them.
got one here.
Mm,
Yeah, and so when we're thinking about what to talk about on these episodes, we go through our comments and we grab like a little screen grab of some of the comments that might be good conversation starters, and some we actually put kind of in the deep treasure trove of like this is a good episode on its own.
right.
So like if we're not responding to your question, it actually might be because it's a good enough question that like
Hmm.
we're gonna do this justice at some point. But anyway, one of the questions that I grabbed and was like, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about this. Threw it in. We've
Definitely.
got a little Google document going, Google Word doc for like, all right, what are we going to talk about in these episodes? And I grabbed this question. I was like, yeah, this question really goes along with what Casey, his experience of painting a bad ghost.
Mm,
And the question is, how do you balance calling something done or good enough, or versus being lazy and not doing your best? Like, when is a paint job finished? How can you call that good? And before we answer this question, I'm going to go off on just a little bit of a tangent
just a
here,
little
and
bit.
forgive me, listeners. So normally we have this policy that we don't read the names of the viewers because somebody's going to mess with us. They're going to put a stupid name on there, and
Hmm.
it's going to be
Hmm.
like a little back alley way into getting us to read a stupid name.
Right.
And the classic example is meat popsicle.
Hmm. Hmm.
Someone puts a stupid name on there like meat popsicle.
Yeah.
And this time we were going through our questions and we're like, oh man, this is a really good question. Copy paste the Word doc. And we were just about to hit record today when I actually like carefully read the name of
Yeah.
this gentle person who wrote this excellent question for us.
What's the name,
Do
Brent?
you want to say it or should I?
I mean, I don't know. You seem pretty upset. I'll just take this. Yeah. So his name's Pete. Pete Mopsicle. You son of a bitch.
So angry. So angry.
I see what you did there, Pete.
Fool us once, Pete.
Yep.
Shame on you. But yeah, this one almost got through. Like this one,
Legitimately.
this was good. Pete Mopsicle. Last name Mopsicle. First name Pete.
Mhm.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and we were bested in this case. But we got a great
100%.
question here. So
yeah, we were
Look.
we were at the point of just like getting there, and then Brett goes, "Hang on a second. Did you read
hang
this?"
on a second. Did you? Yeah, ordinarily we would just have said, we got a question from Pete here, we got a question from PM, and what does PM have for us?
Uh-huh.
Every
A
time.
good question.
Every time. It's like we have one listener who just has 1,000 different Google accounts. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is a good question. So let me rephrase that to you.
Mm.
When is a paint job finished?
That is a good question, and something that if I had considered last week probably would have gotten me in a better place. um yeah, like I suppose it depends on the goal. Right? Are you painting more for display? Are you painting to take pictures and share it? Or are you painting for the fun of painting or for a game? Um theoretically, a done paint job is when all the base coats are on and you've got some shade and some highlights, and you call it a day. It's a clean paint job. Obviously you can keep painting. You can always keep painting, and there's diminishing returns in that. You're eventually going to hit a wall where you're going to say, I don't think I can paint anymore. But then the question comes up, do you want to spend 20 hours painting, a left foot? Probably not. So I think what it comes down to is, where are you most comfortable with stopping?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I really do have like a pattern of how long I'm going to spend on a paint job, and it very much is this, 2 coats of base coat, wash, maybe a couple different colors of wash depending on the different materials. Then get in there with your smaller brush and do some details and some highlights. And for me, it's almost like a feeling. So I get through the steps. You do these steps, but that last step of spend as long as you want doing details and highlighting, and there's lots of different ways to paint, but that's kind of the step that has the most room for going nuts and spending some serious time there.
Yeah.
That's the step of, how long do you want to spend on the details and everything, where you can just be like, okay, I'm done now. But for me, partially it's a rhythm and a ritual, and partially it's just like a feeling like, okay, I am tired of. It's not a negative feeling, but there is almost that, for me, there's like this hard stop of, it's not like, oh yeah, do I want to spend more time on this? It's like, I just run out of steam almost all at once, and it's like, okay, this is done. I've put as much time as I want to spend on this. Hey, it looks pretty cool. I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think that almost all paint jobs get to a point where, like, you get to that highlight stage, the detail stage, and you've put a good amount of work in there. Say you work on a model for 2 hours highlighting, which might be more or less for you. But you get to a certain point where, it looks pretty good, and, you hold it back or you set it on a table and you say, okay, this looks like a lot of my other models. I feel good about this. It fits in with everything else. But I think what ends up happening is that you start to realize that in order to get to the next, say, 10% better than where you've hit, you're going to have to spend almost twice the amount of time to get there as you did the first time, just to get to that point. So it becomes, this multiplication, hours start to stack up. You look at something and say, okay, well, I spent 2 hours to get to the next 10%. I need another 2.5, 3 hours, and then 4 hours to get to that 5% and that 2%, to get into this top echelon of ridiculously good paint jobs. So I think there has to be a willingness to also do that. And if that's just not who you are, or that's not the kind of thing that you want to accomplish, then getting to the point where you feel comfortable that it's done and you've done the highlights that you wanted to and spent the time you wanted to, I don't see why that's not a perfect place to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of this, the biggest answer to this is personal preference. What are you painting the model for? And are you happy with it? Are you ready to move on to the next? That's, of course, that's the main thing, but there's a lot of like little interesting nooks and crannies to talk about here.
Yeah.
So here's a question, Casey. Do you always wait until the very end to base the mini?
Most of the time, yes. Sometimes I don't.
Okay.
But most of the time I do. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a couple steps for me that really take the model way closer to being done. And for me, that is the base. That includes whether that's dry brushing some texture and then putting the black rim around the base or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then it's also the eyes. And
yeah.
So there's almost like a little trick I'll play on myself if I'm actually trying to really make a model look good. Sometimes I will purposely delay those 2 steps the eyes and the base.
Right.
Because again, for me, once a model is starting to look done, like then, yeah, I find myself struggling to put much more time into a model that's starting to look done. Like once a model looks pretty cool, done enough, yeah, I could put this on the shelf and move on to the next thing.
For sure.
For me, that is kind of a struggle. And so sometimes I do play those. If I would like to take a model to a higher standard, I'll play a little trick on myself and not do the base yet.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and then the model looks like it's still in progress for another hour or so, you know.
Right. It's getting you
or I'm able to trick myself into saying this is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like, let's say I have a model, I paint the base, I put the eyes on, the base rim is done and everything. And then I'm working on, trying to get a better highlight on the second chink of the big pauldron or whatever, trying to highlight the shoulder or something after that. Like once the model is really looking good, the highlight on the shoulder just becomes so much less important.
Right. Yeah.
But if the model is obviously not done and the shoulder is just the next thing to do, and we're going to get this shoulder right, then we're going to get the other shoulder, then the knees, and then maybe we'll talk about putting some eyes on this figure,
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, for my personal experience, it's a matter of like just all at once the model feels done. I feel it in my bones. I'm ready to put this down and move on to the next thing. And I actually experimented with this a little bit in a video a few weeks ago, but I think for me that's 2 or 3 evenings of painting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You painted what is it, like 1 a day? Is that what you were shooting for?
Yeah, that was a topic of a video I did a couple weeks ago where I tried speeding up from my normal routine and as kind of a way to think about my normal routine a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I tried doing 1 figure a night for many nights in a row. And if you're doing that, you spend a lot of your time doing base coating and washing, and then just a couple of quick details after that. Whereas if you're spending weeks painting a mini, you're spending a lot of time. I mean, I don't know what you're spending your time on. I never do that. And so it's probably worth the experiment to give that a shot sometime. But
yeah, it's the other side.
I assume
of that,
you're doing
right?
a lot.
The spending an insane amount of time on one model, seeing how far you can push that. That's something I've been meaning to do, because essentially all I ever do can be considered speed painting. I paint a model in a very limited amount of time to get ready for a video, generally. So I am burning through the paints to the point where, sometimes I accidentally wash off other paints with other paints because they're not even dry yet. And that's definitely something that probably should be experimented with, is just sitting down, taking time, and seeing how far. Like, how good of a painter are you, Brent? Like, do you actually know?
Right. And this is a question I don't know right now because I have not really spent time on a model,
Yeah.
Because that's, again, we all fall into our own little rhythm, and I'm worried about how much of a habit that is. I enjoy my habit, and so it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if for every model, maybe I'm spending 4 hours on a model or something like that, and that's just my rhythm. And how would I get myself to spend 20 hours on that model that I feel is looking pretty good after 4 hours? I think it would be a very revealing experience, but. Yeah. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? I don't know. Like, we may never know.
Right. It is entirely possible that painters much greater than we have just done that. They just sat there and got to the center of that Tootsie Pop, and they're just like, yeah, it's X amount. And then they repeat, paint 4 models a year.
Do you think Do you think if going back to a literal Tootsie Pop, do you think
Mhm.
if you got the answer to that question, that just tons of things in life become simpler? Like if you actually had the discipline to count the number of licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, like just do you suddenly become a more adept painter and a better friend? And like, I don't know, like do you does that
I mean,
discipline, that sheer force of will do anything for you in your life? We may
like
never know.
my brain wants to say no, because of course not. But my heart wants to say yes, Brent. Like it will do
That's
those
an
things.
achievement. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, I think that there is a level of achievement for spending 100 hours on a model and making it look the best you can. It's a really cool thing, but that's a long
Right. Right.
time.
Just yeah, getting that benchmark, like being able to say, you know, how good of a painter are you?
Mhm.
This is the best I could do.
Yeah.
And I'm confident that it's the best I could do because yeah, I
Right.
spent 100 hours on it and I could not think of anything else that I could do. Or you
Mhm.
know, the blends on every piece of that model are as good as I could possibly do. And I
Yeah.
don't want to touch it anymore because I'm sure I'll screw it up from where I had it, you know?
That's always my fear. If I keep going,
Yeah.
it's gonna turn a corner, you know? And so far, I've never actually had that happen other than just, like I said, lack of planning and being a little hasty. Um, but when I'm actually focused and trying, I do hit a point where I feel, okay, if I continue working on this, I might be able to make it better, but I don't want to screw it up at the same time. And I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. And that's generally my stopping point. And weirdly, that does vary from model to model hours wise. Like sometimes I'll spend 10 hours on a model, you know, and I will continue to work that and continue to push. And then I'll kind of not give up, but hit that point where I feel, okay, I don't want to screw it up. I like where it's at. Sometimes that process is 4 hours long or even 2 hours long, you know? I think it just depends on the week and what's going on. And there's a lot of outside forces pushing in on that, I think. You know, because who has legitimately 100 straight hours to dedicate to a model?
Very
You know,
few people, and those few people are pretty good painters. So,
yeah.
you know, if we came back in a future episode and I said, what did you do over the past 2 weeks, Casey? And you said, I spent 20 hours on a single miniature, and this mini right here that the listeners at home cannot see, but we'll post somewhere, is the best mini that I can do.
Yeah.
That would be an achievement. Like,
Right.
Someday we should start giving ourselves homework or little challenges or something for these episodes. Like, you know, by next episode, I don't know. I don't want to raise the bar too high here.
Well, I think I'm gonna try and push you on this podcast to not necessarily paint miniatures, but maybe make videos a little more often, a little quicker there. I don't know, is there something I can help you with?
Over the past 2 weeks, I have published 0 videos. Like, you know. And this is a big deal for me because that sense of guilt and self-hatred, self-loathing, I think that's really going to fuel me to do great things moving forward. So, yeah.
That YouTube guilt is powerful.
Yeah. It's like a start of a good Vin Diesel movie where he spends the first like third half of the movie just getting really angry, and then like the last half of the movie is an action scene. But in this case, it would be me getting really depressed for one episode, and then the next episode I will have painted something and made a video about it. Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, that's fine.
That seems healthy. Yeah,
as long as I get my content.
But no, for real though, like the goal of just taking a model. Well, here's another question. I don't even know which model I would pick for that. Like, you have to really love a model.
Yeah.
Because this isn't going to be like, okay, whatever's next in my list of things I want to paint, this is what I'm going to spend 20 hours on. Like, you have to have an idea and be passionate about that idea and not just be guessing at what color you're going to make the axe for that ghost. Like, you have to have a plan to be able to psych yourself up to really execute that plan.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you know what's probably worse for me about that is that I thought I had a plan. Like, I did have a game plan going into that ghost, right? Like, I did know what colors I was gonna paint it. And I should have realized at a certain point that there was a stopping point. And, I watched that back or other people watch that back and comment and say, there were a couple times in there that you could have stopped and you would have been totally fine. And I can't disagree. Like, I look at that and say, yeah, if I had stopped there, I think I would have been pretty happy with that. But, sometimes it doesn't go that way. But, you got to practice and learn when those moments come up, because sometimes you do it and it's there and that's the paint job and it's time to move on to the next model.
Yeah. Yeah, on that one, you definitely needed to move on. But it's all right. Moving on here. I think we've given Pete Mopsicle like plenty of time.
Oh, you son of a bitch.
Look, I'm angry that he found a way to get back into this podcast, but I thank you for the excellent question. But that's quite enough. Hold on, I haven't read the rest of these names with as much care.
That's a good point.
And we're not going to.
So. Over.
Absolutely.
I just did a quick look.
Right.
I think
we have another question here from 27S, and the question is, what hobbies do you wish you had more time for?
I wish I had, honestly, more time to, I don't know, do dirt biking and outdoor sports that were separate from other people. Like, I don't want to say like alone time, but sometimes you just got to get away. And doing something like that, like dirt biking for me specifically, even though that's probably a pretty dangerous thing, generally speaking, to go alone, it's like hiking by yourself and not necessarily telling anyone where you're going. Yeah, like I wish I had more time to do stuff like that. Climb a mountain. Yeah.
Nice. So actually this morning I went for a run, which is not every morning, but maybe once a week. And I'm actually really lucky. The last few places I've lived have actually had pretty decent trails going through the woods, which is, I assume, is a luxury. But yeah, last
have you seen my trail? 3
places I've lived happen to have had a pretty decent set of trails in the woods, not too far away from the building. And
nice.
It's nice to go out in nature there. And we are in this point in history in 2020 where like you see someone else on the trail, you stand way to the side and like stop breathing like for a good 30 seconds. But yeah, like you treat it like a bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. No eye contact.
Slowly back away.
Get a stick. Yep.
Throw the stick. Run.
Yeah, we'll talk about it every time, but it's strange things you miss, but it does the body a lot of good to get outside for just a little while. And
yeah,
probably whether you're with people or not, it's nice to go outside.
Yeah, I've been getting out a lot more, ironically, and I think a lot of people have. Like. There's so many people who are just saying, it's like, well, I'd much rather be inside. I'd much rather be doing what I want to do. No one bothering me. But I think that isolation gets to people and eventually you just want to take a walk, so you are super lucky to have some trails, especially to go through woods and stuff. I've got some, luckily enough, I guess, in sort of a similar manner. I have good dirt bike trails near my house. But walking trails, awesome. They're not great for walking and a little dangerous.
Is it because of the dirt bikes?
Yeah.
Is it not good for walk? Yeah.
Well, they're not flat. They're like ridged. They have bumps, lots of bumps.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's
That's a
funky
footwear
trails
issue.
and
Yeah.
rattlesnakes and things like that.
Okay, rattlesnakes, yeah.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, is it you and the dirt bikes making it like a bad place to go walking? Because
100%.
there was one I guess one apartment back. The trails I used to go on was good most of the time, except for when like the four wheelers came blazing through, and I was just like so angry, like the peace and isolation of the woods.
Yeah. No, and
You
I mean
people.
it's kind of the normal thing around here. Like if you're gonna go walking on those
Okay.
trails, which people do expect, like we bring our dogs and they go off leash out into the desert and all this stuff. I mean, obviously you have to worry about the wildlife because that's just how it goes in the desert. But yeah, like you expect to have to stop, stand to the side, and people are pretty respectful about slowing down, not creating too much dust because that is an issue. Like if some douche like flies by you, like I want to throw a rock at you now, and so does everyone else. That's just how it goes, you know. But most of the time, people are pretty nice about it. So it is just I don't know, daily life, I guess.
Okay. As long as you got your system.
Yeah.
All right. So your answer was dirt biking. Okay.
Yeah.
Alone dirt biking time,
Alone
outdoor
dirt biking
time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like riding with other people, but not right now.
All right now. Yeah. So yeah, I did have a really great little walk/run today. There's enough paths out there and there's enough intersections that you actually can get lost for a little while, which is kind of fun. And so like after a while, it's like, okay, I should probably start walking now so I don't break my legs before I figure out how to get home or whatever. But
Right.
I always like that phase of like figuring out a new set of paths, of like figuring out where all these T's go, and like starting to make one tree that used to look like all the others start to be a landmark. So I figure out like which way to go at this Y intersection, But,
Yeah.
But actually what I was thinking about, what I'd like to spend more time doing is actually, Warhammer Total War 2. Actually, I've rekindled that love recently.
Yeah.
And I've gotten into I've gotten into half of the Total War games over the years here. And the Warhammer version of that game actually is really good, especially 2. It's got like a lot of the units from the old world Warhammer Fantasy. And so it's, these Total War games, they're a big campaign map where you move the armies around, and then when your armies run into each other, it zooms way in. And it's a battle map very much like a game of Warhammer. You've got your blocks of units and you position them. The timer starts and you move your units around. You try to outflank each other, and the Saurus go running into the Skaven, and it's great. And
yeah,
I always love it when I can get into one of those strategy games, like turn-based strategy games, and just get into that phase where like one more turn, and it's nice when a passion takes hold. So yeah, in the last 2 weeks, I've researched pigments, and I've played like 2 days of Warhammer 2 Total War. So
that's awesome.
Not bad.
I still haven't played that game. I see it, and I see the videos coming from it and all this stuff, and it looks awesome. And like, yeah, it's tough sometimes, like to get, especially on the computer, because like the computer for me is like, this is the work space, this is my work time. So like jumping in and playing a game on the computer specifically is very difficult. Whereas like consoles are a little bit easier, but it's kind of the same thing. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. I'll have to check that out at some point.
Yeah, just one of those things that really takes hold and drags you right in. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it's also like, it's my answer to things you wish you had more time for, because I can't be spending all day, every day, one more turn and taking Krokgar around the map and conquering things for the Slan and the Lizardmen. But I wish I could. I wish I could.
Lizardman update. There you go.
Okay. So we have another question here from MWW. Are you both looking forward to the return of the old world? Are you going to keep models on square bases just in case?
Well, with you playing all that Total War, I can see it in you. You excited about the old world?
Yeah. So I remember the announcement from last November that was everything comes back into style, or everything comes back around even squares, and then there's a picture of a square base. And I actually don't remember seeing a lot of updates since then. So we're 6 months later now. Has there been any more announcements about what the old world project from Games Workshop is? Whatever it is, it's supposed to be like a couple years out still.
It's still like 2.5 years away. They did put something out. I don't remember what it was, but there was a small update, I think, recently. It's a very interesting idea that they would cancel the old world, tell everyone it's dead, move to round bases, and then give us a 3-year timeline on how they're bringing back square bases. That's a lot of hype.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point where I was really upset about them destroying the old world. Yeah. Like, 3-4 years, whatever it was now, they said Warhammer Fantasy is dead. Chaos won. Chaos destroyed the world. And then a bunch of lore that I've never had the time to try to understand happened. And now all the models are back mostly, but it's not the old world, and they're on round bases, and that's the big change. We're not in the old world now. We're in the Age of Sigmar. The models are more ridiculous, and they're on round bases. And models look better on round bases. Yes. There's a very few that really look good as a regiment or a phalanx or whatever. But most of them look better on round bases. If you have a single model of anything, it will look better on a round base. Just full stop. It will. And if you have a skirmish unit of anything, they will look better on round bases. But that I've kept all my goblins on square bases because they look awesome, and just a big stupid blob of goblins. And not that goblins would be blob. They're not. Don't think of them as doing rank and file. Just think of a 20 millimeter square base. You can fit a lot more of them in the same foot by foot region than if you're using 25 millimeter rounds.
It's very true.
You can really pack those in there, and they don't elbow their neighbors the way some models do. So did you ever play Warhammer Fantasy, Casey? Because I did.
No, I never did.
Okay.
Yeah, I started in 40K, and then the people who were playing at the time, they didn't like fantasy. They thought it was stupid. Who knows why? I don't know. Something to get into for another time, probably. But yeah, never got into it. I did buy at a thrift store in San Francisco once. I found an old Warhammer strategy game for PC, and the art looked insane. It had this black orc on the front of it, and it came with a black orc on a square. And I had that dude forever. I eventually cut his arm off.
Was that the axe in the air? Axe in the air, sword, mid-level? Oh, yeah. Those came in boxes of 6, and I had, had 2 boxes of 6 and the command squad. Yeah.
Yeah, but it
Black
came
Orc's
with
good to work.
And I brought the game home and put it in, and immediately was so disappointed. It was this stupid looking, literally blocks of color. It was basically pixels. Fighting pixels, and they were calling it units of something. Yeah.
So it looks like the old battle reports. In White Dwarf, they used to have the blocks labeled, or I guess it looks like any old military history thing where the regiments moving around the battlefield. But
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, White Dwarf used to have the rectangles and the big, flanking arcs and stuff for the pivots and the wheels, and in the nice big yellow block it would say the Moon Clan, like
Right.
Chudas or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was essentially like
Yeah.
that. It was real bad. So that was my experience with Warhammer Fantasy, though. Like, I was super excited about it, and then I wasn't. But I did
Mhm.
keep that model, and I ended up putting the arm of that Black Orc. I cut it off, and I used it as a basing bit on one of my Eldar. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was my extent of using anything fantasy was a right arm with a sword in it.
Okay. So I guess let me tell you my experience with squares then and fantasy.
Yeah.
I think that the big blocks and the armies as a whole can look awesome in squares.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, it doesn't make any sense for goblins to be in regiments, but like just the look of like the spears unit 1, spears unit 2, bow unit 1, like that. Regiments look cool. You'd have to find an army where that made more sense. Like if you
Sure.
wanted to get in, like if Empire looked cool, or
Mhm.
if you thought Empire looked cool and you had those big blocks, that for dwarves it actually looks awesome.
Mhm.
If you get, because dwarves would form ranks and they'd have their squares, and their squares would be positioned just downhill from where their cannons were and everything, and that, I think that's really cool. Like the look of the two battlefields standing across from each other, especially on the first few turns when they're just kind of marching towards each other and
Yeah.
lobbing rocks at each other and stuff. And so aesthetically, I think some days I could really get in the mood for setting up a game of Warhammer Fantasy or the Old World, or
Mhm.
we're not even sure what this game is. We are not
Very
sure
true.
if it is. We are not sure, right? Or I mean, neither of us read the most recent news announcement, but
Yeah.
from where we're sitting right now, we don't know if it's actually the same like scale game. We don't know if it's just, okay, we'll rewrite the rules for Warhammer Fantasy, and if you still have anything on a square base, you can use it. But
Yeah.
just kind of talking of my memories of old Warhammer Fantasy. Yeah, like, and how dense you could get good paint jobs. Like if you paint 20 dwarves
Yeah.
really nicely and stack them up all nice and next to each other, that's like 4 inches by 5 inches.
Mhm.
Actually, they might even, they're on smaller bases, so it's like less than that.
Yeah.
3.5 inches by 4 inches or something. It's like a really tightly packed. You spent so many hours painting those dwarves, and they take up the
Like no
the
footprint.
tiniest amount of space on the board. And
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something to that of like, yeah, putting so much quality into such a dense little packet, and then having, you got your warriors next to your thunderers, next to your iron breakers, next to your longbeards. Like, there's a real aesthetic appeal there for me that
Mhm.
I would love to, regardless of whether this is ever a game or not, I would love to someday paint up those dwarves.
Yeah.
But wow. It's also a game, like, because that's the way it looks cool, it is also a game with such high model counts. Like
Yeah.
if your unit that is behaving as a rectangle, as behaving as a pixel, is 20 dwarves that you need to paint, that's a steep entry point right there.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that's some of the reasons why they eventually discontinued it, right? Is the entry point into Warhammer Fantasy at the time was probably double or triple that of a 40K army. Like, you
Yeah.
need so many guys. I mean, yeah, there's a limit, to like what people will and won't do, or how many people will and won't do something. And Age of Sigmar came out and they're like, no points, no rules. Like, here's
Yeah.
your box of dudes, here's your box of dudes, and you can have a legit fun time with a small model count,
Right.
It's almost more surprising that they didn't just do 8th edition, rewrite the rules to accommodate but I wonder if it just would have pissed people off either way. So they're just like, Age of Sigmar it is, whatever.
Yeah, it would have made people angry either way, but the longer I've gotten from it, the more I appreciate, like, they needed to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Warhammer Fantasy was not making them money.
No, it wasn't at all.
And it needed, the company needed for them to kill that game and make a good game in its place, or make a game that people were excited about, willing to buy into, that would attract new players. Like, they needed to, I don't know if they needed to kill Warhammer Fantasy, but they needed to invent Age of Sigmar for sure.
Yeah.
And like at first I was like, wow, that's stupid. And this was a time period where every decision from GW was stupid.
Yeah.
Like everything was from a customer relations perspective, like, you used to get 20 guardsmen in a box for $20, but now it's 10 in a box for $30. Like, good work, guys. Like,
right. How nice.
That's
why nobody can play.
Shrewd business you're running there. Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of 12-year-olds to buy into the game at that rate. Good thinking. Way to grow your customer base. That's now you're thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, props to Games Workshop for essentially turning that around with all of the hate in their face and succeeding out of that. Right,
and yeah, they made a bold power move there and said, Chaos won. I know you guys have been wanting the story to move forward, and Chaos won. It's all gone. I guess you can use your old models, but it's going to look a lot better if you put them on round bases. And these are Sigmarines. Enjoy. So I understand why these Space Marines without any guns, but with more hammers, they're
it's a Warhammer, right? You got a hammer? It's a Warhammer. You get it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, think about it. Think about it, nerd. Yeah. And at the time, like, I actually wasn't in Warhammer at the time that happened. I heard about it and started getting back into Warhammer, 6 months or a year after the old world died. And at that point, the friend who was getting me back in was Warhammer 40K, and so I hadn't been thinking about, wasn't concerned about fantasy, but he was telling me what was happening there. I'm like, oh man, GW doing these GW things again, like, making of course, like, but like I said, over time I've come to appreciate it. Like, models look better on round bases. I am glad that you can get into the game with a couple of boxes instead of like a couple of boxes equals one rectangle, and the game's not going to be much fun if you only have one rectangle,
right. I take my rectangle and pivot to 20 degrees and move forward.
And I respect that people can have different opinions on whether moving rectangles across the board is fun. I kind of like moving rectangles across the board, but if there is any terrain on the board, it doesn't work. Like, if there's any terrain on the board, you need to be very good at knowing how to reform your rectangle. And if you reform your rectangle to get around some terrain, well, then it doesn't fit on the movement tray that you have. If you had a movement tray that was, 4x5 and you need to get around a tree, and you spend half your turn, forming into a double file marching column to get around that tree. Well, I hope you have a different size movement tray in your, backpack, and you're willing to move all your little dwarfs onto that. And then after you're past the tree, you got to reform again, and something else is going to need to wheel out of the way. And
I can see
if you just play it, if you play it without terrain, or just like some houses on the sides or something to give a little bit of flavor, like, again, I think it looks pretty cool. I kind of like the rectangles marching at each other, and the yelling at each other on turns 1, 2, and 3, and then they meet, and then but again, every game I ever played is just like, a couple turns of marching at each other, where the interesting thing is chucking a few rocks or firing a few cannons, and then everything just meets in a line, and then you roll dices and remove things, which I guess isn't that much different than a lot of other games, but
I mean, when you think about Age of
For
Sigmar
me,
in a nutshell,
yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I
At least you
feel,
can move around trees.
yeah, exactly. I feel like it's a little bit more um, uh, entertaining to see.
Mm.
You know, having the ability to move around and through and over. I don't know if you've played Warcry, but that has that kind of like motion to it, that movement that's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they were trying to just move away from this idea that, yeah, well, terrain on the table makes the game kind of not great. You know, like I got to spend all this time to do all these things. And I mean, obviously, there are
Yeah.
plenty of people out there that like that's why they're playing that game. They want the.
And there's a lot of strategic
Yes,
choices
exactly.
there. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, and like I can appreciate how someone would have it makes the movement phase, you know, have more interesting choices to it, and I can appreciate why someone who thinks of really, you know, being a general or whatever is like, yes, if I get into my marching pattern now and then do a wheel and then reform, I'll be in the perfect place to attack the orcs, you know, whatever. But
I wonder though if it will be the same. I don't think it will be. I think it's going to be here are movement trays, here are square bases. It's basically Age of Sigmar in the old world with some rules to kind of compensate. I don't think it's going to be the exact same thing.
Well, of course, I've heard rumors that it's not even the same scale. Like it's more
like an epic scale.
War Master. Yeah, epic or War Master or whatever. Yeah.
That's interesting because I think that would piss people off even more. Like you want to announce that square bases in the old world are coming back, and then you go, yes, but they are 1/10 the size. Don't you enjoy these? Like, you serious? Like, I transferred my models back to square bases, dickheads. Like,
okay,
that's gonna happen.
If you transfer your models back to square bases before you know what scale the game is, that's on you. Like
oh, for sure.
And if you've already done this, that's on you. That's on you.
But even then, that would be a dick move.
But yeah, the question was like, are we saving models on square bases? Like, are we? So I actually do have some, and you know, the video I made a little over a year ago now, the goblins batch painting video, I purposely had those on square bases because I thought they'd look awesome together. But so many other models elbow each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like back when I played orcs and goblins, the goblins half of that mostly fit onto their base and stood nice and neatly together.
Mm-hmm.
But the orcs were a nice kit in that, you know, it was a set of legs, a torso, 2 arms, and so, you know, it had more posability there and a head. But you had to pose them exactly right so that you could make a rectangle out of the models you ended up with.
Right.
Because so many of the poses that you could make would just have them, you know, bumping into each other. Or you had to know, like, this orc can be in the middle. This orc can only be on the left side of the square. This one can only be on the right side of the square, just because of, like, other, you know, it's like a puzzle. Like making that block would be like a puzzle. Otherwise, you would not be able to put them base to base. And
that sounds so frustrating.
It was. And, you know, that limits the creativity of the sculptors. Like, one of the requirements of the sculptors is that if you make 20 of these, some of them will be able to be on the inside of the square. And for Age of Sigmar, that is clearly not a consideration.
Not even a little bit.
With the jumping and the leaping and they can put the arms in any position.
I love the movement that the new models have, and a majority of them. You know, obviously there are some interesting ones from time to time, but yeah, the aesthetic and motion about the new models, and I mean, obviously the technology that they're using now to get the models to look the way they do is even better. And there's no way that they would have been able to do that if the old world was still here.
Right. Well, here's the thing. Like, if the old world is like the same scale back on square bases, you know, go make a regiment. I don't think you could put modern models into those regiments. They would elbow each other. There would be swords that would go, be touching 2 models away. Like you would not be able to make that jigsaw puzzle go together unless the square bases were gigantic. I don't know.
Then who is this game for?
I don't know. I mean, of course, there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of questions about this game, and especially since neither of us have read any news updates since the picture of a square base 6 months ago. And I don't think there actually have been a ton of news updates since then.
I don't think so.
We are not qualified to answer this.
That's true. They could have already explained all this, and
yeah, for me, I'm gonna sit tight and wait. I will say that I am not going to be taking any of my painted orcs from the year 2000 off of their square bases. Maybe it was 2002. Anyway, I am not going to be taking any of my orcs or my oldest goblins off of their square bases and putting them on rounds. And so, to the answer to that question, no, I'm not. I'm not going to be rebasing to rounds, or yes, I am going to be saving the square-based models that I already have, but partially that's just nostalgia, and those are my models from back in the early days. Right, yeah. I'm not doing anything to them. I'm keeping them the way they are, and
as you should.
That's the way it goes. Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, I actually have a good amount of models on square bases that I've just gotten. Like a majority of the models that I paint are single models. So if I have a whole squad of something, then, I'll pop one of them off the square base. I've got a bunch of slotted round bases and swap that out, and no big deal. Like all of my goblins, I put on rounds. And it's funny that you say, the goblins look so good in squares, and they do. But I just remember after I got them off the squares and put them on rounds, I was thinking to myself, man, these look so much better on rounds. Yeah, I really enjoyed the way that they looked.
That's actually the only model I disagree. They're so small for a 25 millimeter base, or maybe it's just I'm used to looking at them the other way. Yeah, that base is so big compared to the model on those night goblins. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Square bases have their place. I think they have more cons than pros, but man, those old White Dwarf magazines where you had the blocks of dwarves moving towards the blocks of goblins, there is something awesome about that aesthetic, and I don't know how much time I'd ever be willing to spend to try to recreate that, but it looked cool. And then of course you'd still have your big heroes then were on square bases, and sometimes a big hero would be on a really small square base and would not fit in there.
Oh man. Yeah.
I think actually, here's the thing. I think they actually had rules where you could use a Black Orc Big Boss as an independent character, but no, not an independent character, a character leading a unit of goblins. So you could have a big Black Orc leading a unit of goblins, and the Black Orcs barely fit onto their 25 millimeter squares. Yeah. The goblins are all on 20 millimeter squares. So geometrically, if you want that Black Orc to be leading those goblins, you've got to find a way to cram him on a 20 millimeter square base. I mean, I could be misremembering some of this, but there was a lot of stuff especially command units where your lead orc is going to be a bigger model.
Yeah.
And even on a 25 millimeter base, he's going to be spilling over his base. The front line of your unit is already going to be screwed up by this giant orc with his axe hanging halfway over the standard bearer's base. And again, a puzzle just to make those units. Well, man, there were some bad things about the bad old days. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people take the bad with a lot of good that they remember, and I'm sure it was fun for a long time, and hopefully, honestly,
those were also the days of. Yeah, those were the days of blister packs too, and so you would buy a blister pack that had 2 models in it. Like I remember, I was Orcs and Goblins, and so I bought a blister pack of Biggins, which just means it's like the slightly more elite orc, which actually was a smaller model than the regular plastic orcs, but the Biggins, And so, as a child, I think I had 2 lawns that I was mowing, and I saved my money, and I go to the store and I bought a pack of Biggins, and then in the codex it's like, you want to use a square of 20 of these, but 40 would be better. It's just like, oh my, it's like this pack of 2 models cost $7 or whatever it was, and at least now if you're buying a unit, normally the box has at least 5, and normally normally the box is the minimum sized unit.
Yeah, I think they've been a lot better about that. Although there are some that people still get upset about. Because like the minimums are like one-off for weird reasons. It's like, oh, well, this particular box, it's not necessarily for buying this unit. It's like a quick build, whatever. So it's got this many in it. And it's like, okay, but now they're uneven numbers. Like you think somebody would do
people were really upset about.
Yeah,
the first box, the starter box for. First edition Age of Sigmar. A lot of the Sigmarine units were like that. Yeah. Oh, I just remembered one more like actually cool thing. I was complaining about like trying to fit big units onto small bases.
Yeah.
But I remember the Lizard Men actually had one really cool thing. I think like the Skaven did too. But a Croxagore, like a really big lizard.
Yeah.
Would go on a 40 millimeter square and fit right in with the skinks on their 20 millimeter squares.
Yeah, that does look pretty rad.
And so that was like a good way of handling it. But so many of the things in that game were 20 millimeter squares and 25 millimeter squares, which do not jive together.
No.
Like you could not put a Saurus leading a unit of skinks, but you could have a big Croxagore with 4 times the area base leading a unit of skinks or being incorporated, or put a rat ogre in with your Skaven slaves or whatever.
It's an interesting way to control kind of the meta of the game too, like on a whole other sub level of design that okay, all of these units go on this specific size base and they can only be paired with one of these on this specific size base. So you're limiting what people can actually put into a tray. That's an interesting kind of a game design mechanic, I guess. That
and of course it had other effects when a line of troops was meeting a line of troops. Like you can fit more goblins in the same frontage than you could fit orcs, and so you'd get more attacks from those tiny little spears. There were definitely some interesting fallouts. I mean, even now with the circle bases, there's still some advantage to having smaller bases. You can pack things in more tight.
In fact, the rule is that
of course,
you
now
can't
with
have a base that's smaller than the recommended one, but you can have one that's larger. You're fine there.
Yeah. So recently in 40K, like orcs with a K moved to 32 millimeter bases, I think, right?
I think a lot of the units like that did. Like 25 mil, I'm pretty sure is just dead.
Imperial Guard, Eldars.
But even then, those don't even fit on 25 millimeter bases. Like the feet fall off the sides. I know, I heard that somewhere. I don't know if it's true, but I know a lot of the units are being changed over.
I think, a lot of them have. And a big one was orcs was interesting, I guess, because they're really all about close combat and getting like a ton of orcs with their choppas into close combat. And when you start making that base bigger, it's actually way harder to get as many orcs in the same area.
I mean, unless you're attacking something with a bigger base than there was before. I mean, I think the whole Primaris thing is introduced an issue, but that's probably a topic for another podcast, right?
We'll save that one for another day. Yeah.
So why don't we just answer the question? Are you excited for the old world to come back?
I am interested. I am intrigued. Yeah, always interested to see a new product and see what they do with it. Like I've got plenty of stuff to paint in the meantime, but yeah, I am curious to see what they do. And so I'll say this, like if I am able to detach myself a little bit, I always love a good public relations failure. I especially like BlizzCon is something I watch with great delight every year to like see what they're gonna mess up. Like if a new PlayStation is released, I'll watch that stream absolutely, like to see if it's a terrible public relations failure. Like I love and right now with our position having a podcast and having our YouTube channels, like we really can't be divorced enough from this to really enjoy if it's a disaster. But
it's a good point.
So we'll get slightly roped in. So I guess this is not a case where I really am rooting for a disaster, but this is a situation where I am not too invested in actually playing this game. I mean, if it's cool and I end up being interested in it, hey, that would be cool, but I am not excited to the point where I will be disappointed if it's not cool. Where I'm sitting right now, like no expectations, and so only way to go is up. So
yeah, I think that's a good healthy place to be, is not to have too high of expectations, because and you make several good points. Like we don't know what the scale is going to be. If it seriously is an epic scale game, then okay, that's one thing, but if it's
that's interesting. That's in some ways that's more interesting, but
I mean, if you want to talk about public relations disasters,
what if it's a mobile game? What if it's a mobile game? Like I enjoyed that so much. Yeah. BlizzCon, when they're talking about, all right, our big announcement of BlizzCon, our big announcement for the world of Diablo cell phone game.
Was I the only one that was actually kind of excited about that? I feel like I'm like
you were excited about that.
Existence. I love Diablo. Having it on my phone sounded great. Like, so what? It's not Diablo 4. Big deal.
Okay. Yeah. No, my phone battery just is not up to playing like decent games. Like my phone can play games for 15, 20 minutes. Like it's other than that, I'm like plugged in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets super hot and the battery lasts not very long, certainly way less than an hour if I'm actually trying to play a game.
Yeah.
And there's some decent cell phone games out there, but if my phone's going to get super hot and like be kind of sluggish and need to be plugged in, I'd prefer to have Diablo on my computer. Yeah.
Very, very true. Totally understandable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've purchased Diablo 3 on legitimately every system, I don't know. I put a lot of hours into Diablo 3. And so the idea of having it on my phone just sounded nice. And I was like, whatever, it seems fine. And I moved on with my life. Okay. And I have to imagine that the old world Warhammer coming back will be very similar for me. I'm going to look at it and go, that sounds cool, and move on with my life.
Yeah. Get those microtransactions for the wedge formation for your knights. Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah.
Oh, I think that would mark the end of Games Workshop as we know it. Like straight up mobile game with microtransactions. Like, we're done.
Yeah, when you can disappoint your fan base to the point where they get angry enough to make just some really fun memes for the rest of the world, then that's hey, you got to look at the silver lining on these things.
Warhammer Fantasy players twice just as hard. That seems so cruel.
Look, I'm saving the models that I still have on square bases. Every once in a while, if I have a model I can never paint it or whatever, I'll take them off the square base and put them on round and actually get around to painting them. But
yeah,
we'll see. For now, I'm relaxed about the whole situation. We're gonna sit back. If some people end up being outraged, I will find a way to at least privately enjoy it. Right now, 2 years before that happens, I'm telling you that in the future I will privately enjoy a a public relations disaster or a complete failure, but hey,
Yeah.
It could be cool. Could be cool. Yeah. Got no skin in this game. It's all right.
Right. 2 years is a long time to wait too, so I'm sure there'll be lots more information. And
it actually was really interesting. Yeah, how early they announced it.
That's a weird thing to do.
Yeah, I wonder if it was like a situation where they had actually like accidentally leaked a little bit of something and they needed to get ahead of it, or if they wanted to make a, because they've been doing a really good job of like their teasers and stuff and like, talking about upcoming releases, and maybe they just felt they were like pretty light on one thing and they wanted to beef it up, or like they're like, oh, we need one more announcement today. Like, what about the old world? Not yet. We don't have anything else. The old world, like.
It's a very good question. I do wonder, because it does feel like there was a leak and something happened. Because why on earth would you actually do that? I don't think that there was any good reason to actually do that, because they've been so good about the other ones, Well,
I guess we're like disproving ourselves right now, because like we just spent 10 minutes talking about like hyping it up with giving them free media here. So
that's an extremely good point. And on that note, thank you for joining us on another podcast episode of Paint Bravely. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out by leaving us a review on iTunes, subscribing to the YouTube channel, and sharing this message with your hobby friends. As always, we appreciate you for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
We appreciate you.
Pete Mopsicle.
Pete Mopsicle. We appreciate you, Pete Mopsicle. Don't ever talk to us again.